Hello everyone, my name is Iris France, 我叫林婉如. Today we're going to talk about the second degree price discrimination. So in this story we have a monopolist, and the monopolist knows the shape of the demand curve of both high tide and low tide. But when the consumer comes to a shop, the monopolist cannot tell whether this person is high tide or low tide. And therefore this monopolist is going to use different kind of prices for different quantity in order to tell them apart. So in the beginning of the story, we have low tide and high tide consumers. And what the monopolist hope is that if you're the low tide, if I could tell you're the low tide, I'm going to charge you according to your lower demand curve. I'm going to sell X1 unit, and I'm going to charge you according to your demand curve, and I'm going to charge $8 for X1 units. So as a monopolist, I'm going to grab all your consumer surplus. If you're the high tide though, I'm going to sell you X2 units, and I'm going to charge you this total amount, so A plus B plus C. Now the problem is that in this scenario, I cannot tell whether you are high tide or low tide consumer. So if you're a high tide consumer, you're going to say, no, I'm the low tide consumer, and I only want to buy X1 units. Then what happens? If you say you're a low tide consumer and you only want to buy X1, but you are actually the high tide, then you're going to go home with consumer surplus B because you only pay A, and your real willingness to pay is here, so you're going to have the consumer surplus B. So as a monopolist, I would scratch my head, is there a way that can induce you to tell me your true type? So I devised another charging scheme. I would say, well, if you're buying up to X1 unit, I'm going to charge according to DL. But if you want to buy any more units, more than X1, then I'm going to charge according to DH. Now notice that if you're a low tide, you will never buy more than X1. Why is that? Because I said if you want to buy any more than X1, I will charge you according to the high tide. Now, well, your willingness to pay is already 0 here, so there's no way I can charge you anything higher than 0 if you're the low tide. So I know you're low tide, you will never buy more than X1. Now, if you're the high tide, I'm charging you according to DH after you purchase your X1 unit. So for the additional unit, I'm going to charge here. So what happens is this: if you're low tide, you're going to buy X1, you pay A. But if you're the high tide, then you're going to buy X2. But for the first X1 unit, you only have to pay A. So you're going to go home with consumer surplus here. And for the additional units you purchase, you are not going to get any consumer surplus because I charge you according to DH. And therefore, you still have the consumer surplus B. So here, if you're a high tide, you have no incentive to pretend to be a low tide because whether you pretend or not, your consumer surplus is still B. So now we know after we change the package, now the high tide has no incentive to pretend to be a low tide. And that's very good. But the monopolist will ask, is it possible that I grab part of the high tide's consumer surplus and put in my pocket by repackaging it? And the answer is yes. So now we're going to reduce X1 to X0. So the new pricing is this. For the low tide, we're going to charge A prime. If you buy up to X0, I'm going to charge you A prime according to the low tide's demand curve. But if you want to buy any more than that, we are going to charge you according to the high tide's demand curve here. Now, if you're a low tide, you will not buy anything more than X0. The reason is this: if you buy a little bit more than X0, you're going to have to pay according to the high tide's demand curve. But your willingness to pay is not that high, so you're not going to buy that much. So if you're a low tide, you're going to buy up to X0, and you're going to pay A prime. So that's a low tide. What about the high tide? So for the high tide, you will buy X2, and for the first X0 unit, you are going to pay A prime. But for the additional unit, you will have to pay according to your higher demand curve, so this block. Now, what will happen to the monopolist? You can see that for the monopolist, they are going to lose some sale from the low type. In particular, they are going to lose this triangle x0, x1e because the low type are not buying that much anymore. But we're going to gain some part from the high type. We are going to gain this trapezoid from the high type. Why is that? Because the high type, previously up to x1, they are paying the lower price. But now, if they want to buy this part, they will have to pay according to their willingness to pay. So the gain is this trapezoid FGX1E for the monopolist. And for now, you could see the blue dotted area, the gain is higher than the cost for the monopolist. So it is worth it for the monopolist to repackage it and move x1 to the left to x0. So up to what point? Well, you think about this. At the margin, when we're moving, continue to move from x0 to the left, let's say just tiny a little bit, upside of, then you can see that we are gaining this distance from the high type. So distance FE, that's the marginal benefit. What about the marginal cost? The marginal cost we lose from the low type is exactly distance EX0. So that's what we lose from the low type. So that's the marginal cost. And the marginal benefit is FE. Now from microeconomics, you have learned that we need to stop at the point where marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. Now that brings us to our last diagram. This is the marginal benefit. That's the marginal cost. And they have to be equal for me to maximize my profit. So at the end of the day, this is how I'm going to design my package. From quantity 0 to xm, I am going to charge you a double prime. I'm going to charge you according to the demand curve of the low type. So I'm going to charge you this amount. But if you want to buy more than that, I'm going to charge you according to DH, and therefore I'm going to charge you this amount. So if you're the low type, you are going to buy XM, and you're paying a double prime, and the low type's consumer surplus is still 0. If you're the high type, you are going to buy X2, and for the first amount from 0 to XM, the high type is going to pay only a double prime, so high type still gets a consumer surplus, B double prime. And for the additional unit from XM to X2, the high type will have to pay C double prime plus D. And therefore, the high type has a consumer surplus, B double prime. But notice how D double prime is a lot smaller than before. So this is a second degree price discrimination. I hope it helps. I'll see you next time.